my true pleasure to welcome Mastaneh Moghadam. Welcome, Mastaneh.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy you're here.
I'm very thrilled to be here, and thank you for reaching out and wanting to discuss something that I hope will be informative and give us a chance to really look at stuff we don't look at normally.
Well, you are truly the leading expert, and without repeating your bio, I just want to share with everybody that you are a licensed clinical social worker who has been working in this field for over 25 years. You're the executive director of Cross-Cultural Expressions, and you personally have a stake in this. As an Iranian Jewish woman, you know personally what so many in the community struggle with, and you hear those stories every day. And I'm so grateful and gratified that you're here to share some of them. So tell us, what brought you to this work?
Well, I mean, I think coming in as an immigrant, I came here with my parents and my siblings when I was about 4 years old. So we got here a little bit before the revolution, but definitely coming in as an immigrant, I guess makes you more aware of the stories that immigrants tell around you. So perhaps that was my fascination with social work and with therapy and psychology to begin with. But really what brought me working with the Iranian community, the capacity that I do, was just a very random placement I got when I was getting my master's degree with a Jewish family service. And once I got there, I had to do an outreach project for my master's degree. And the director at that time of the office that I was working for said to me, you know, Iranians seem to have a lot of problems coming in for therapy. Why don't you do something about that? And so that caused my outreach project to be setting up something called the Iranian Counseling Peer Counseling Helpline and training peer counselor advocates and volunteers to really start to just in a safe manner over the phone where it's confidential, hear the stories. And the more stories I heard, the more I realized what was really happening within the community and therefore what was needed. And so
And there are all kinds of stories. I mean, as a rabbi, when I was at Sinai Temple for 10 years, where we had a large Persian community, I heard so many stories. You must have been a pioneer, because a woman going to get her master's degree as an immigrant in the Persian community, were you one of a few, or were your parents like, I'm so glad you're doing this?
My parents were very encouraging. I wouldn't say I was unique because by the time, my generation came around, I think there were a lot of women and young women getting master's degrees and becoming doctors and all kinds of professional degrees. So my story is definitely not unique in that. I think it would have been more unique for my mother's time for sure. But being that I had been in the US since age 4, no, I don't think my story was particularly unique, but thank you. Thank you for suggesting.
So many stigmas, quote unquote, exist in the Iranian culture, whether it's having a child without a spouse, whether it's being gay, whether it is, you can speak to them all. And I know you've heard all of them. Why does this seem so prominent in the Iranian culture? And is it very different from other cultures?
I think you have to really look at a culture that is more still grounded within a collectivist perspective to get your answer to that. Because no, it's not that different from other cultures who are more grounded in collectivist perspectives, or what we now view as like more traditional or old world cultures.
Yeah, how would you define a collectivist perspective?
So the collectivist is more, you got to look at it as more of a tribal culture, which really the whole world was since the beginning. So it stresses interdependence a lot more. It downplays concepts of individuality or uniqueness. It encourages compliance. It encourages conformity, cooperation, and all of this in an effort to keep your tribe or your in group safe. Because if you think back to the days where almost everyone lived in a tribal manner, you really needed to have an outward appearance of strength, right, and power, so that you wouldn't be attacked by other groups, by
So
other
the
tribes.
origins of it were really about keeping the community safe. They didn't have a negative.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's all about feeling there's safety in numbers. You don't want to stand out because standing out puts you at risk. And so all of that really plays into the fact that you have to conform and that you have to be working together in order for the survival of all. So it really has a connotation of like life and death to it. You know,
Right. It was born out of a need, this desire to conform and to keep secrets and to be safe. And when you immigrated to America, did those conflict, that culture directly came into conflict with what is our American culture, which is all about the individual.
right. And what we see now is this like more American, liberal perspective or individualistic culture was really something that came about in the last maybe 100, years. And it was a philosophy that grew out of Western Europe and North America. So it's really a more new kind of way of living that really is connected to technological advances that allowed people to not have to be so interdependent on each other for survival.
Right.
Because
So you could be dependent on technology or something else like the ring, right? You could your house could be safe because of technology, and so you didn't rely on another person. So it was okay to be more of yourself. So let me ask you a difficult question. Do you think there were numbers of nonconformists back in the tribal culture? They just weren't public about it.
I think there's always nonconformists for sure. Were they not public about it? I think you have to look within the time frame. I think you have some of the greatest poets and philosophers like, Rumi, who was a nonconformist, but then I think it created a lot of duality, which is actually what we're seeing now too, right? People compartmentalizing who they are and being one way when they feel like it's safe, but really having a different outward appearance. So no, I think there's always people who push boundaries, and thank God they do, because it helps us evolve and grow. Because at the end of the day, within a society filled with secrets and mistrust and basically what comes out of that collectivist society is a fear-based society, right?
Right.
And what we know is that the more fear-based you are, yes, it does get in the way of evolution and evolving and growth and advancement. So there has to be people who have the courage to push.
But
And
what you just
oftentimes,
described is a lot of people living in secrets, like compartmentalizing their life. I'm gay with this group of friends, but I'm not with this group of friends, or I'm, out or whatever. What you just described is from Ashkenazi, very arrogant viewpoint, feels like a very sad thing. But you say that secrets are actually not necessarily a bad thing.
it depends on the uh, where you're coming from, right? So if you're living in an environment where everything is around collectivist culture and where there are uh, limitations as far as what's, well, to give an example, so if you're living within a government, right, that is very fear-based, which some might argue most governments are, then yeah, it does become life and death, and so you do have to conform, right? But the more uh, secure based or love based or whatever you want to call it, individualistic, freedom based place you are, then the more opportunity you do have to grow and evolve. But it can't be an individual thing. I mean, it has to be individuals pushing society, pushing individuals, pushing society. You can't have one without the other, because then it does create an imbalance and a lack of safety. Do you understand? The growth has to be
Yes.
together.
That's so beautiful, because what you're describing is that there was strength in the secrets to keep you safe. And the more we build a safe society, the more we can expose and share ourselves. So let's talk about the Iranian culture in particular.
Mhm.
What do you think are the biggest secrets that are harbored, and which are the ones, the taboos, that you are actively working against breaking?
So this is based on, again, going back to tribal systems. It's a hierarchical based society, right? And so whatever the powers that be suggest is the status quo, is the light and the good, right, is what everyone needs to strive to. So uh, you don't want to show that you're different. So within that community, you got to look at the rules. The rules, it's a patriarchal society, right? So the rules are you get married, you have children. The more children you have, the happier you are, which is really code for the safer we are, right? The bigger our group is. Um, you have education, you have money. I mean, I don't think it's that different from anything else, other than the more you're drenched in that still hierarchical, particularistic kind of perspective, the more these things are going to have meaning and influence in your life. So, yeah, no, you can excel to the limits that the hierarchy powers that be say it's good to excel to, given your role. Because another thing about collectivist cultures is that it has very well defined roles. If you're a woman, here are your expectations. If you're a man, if you're a father, if you're a grandfather, a mother, a daughter, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of expectations. So there's some rigidity in that.
Right. And I hear a lot of young people wanting to break out of that rigidity, but I also hear not young people wanting to break out of that rigidity. You see women in their 40s, 50s in the Iranian culture that are saying, like, I don't want to be married to this person anymore. I want to be divorced. I want to find out who I am. So do you see it's across the boards that American, or this individualistic culture, is permeating Iranian society? It's not just the young people?
I think it's not only American individualistic culture, but I think, again, it's the idea of a more universal perspective because of technology being adapted all over. Okay. And then once you have something, then you have the traditionalists fighting it as well. Right. So the more
Right.
you try to push forward, it takes a while to create that balance. But I could tell you that, yes, absolutely, because, while everyone was in Iran, for example, the culture and the society at their own pace was adapting to a more individualistic, universal perspective, slowly, at their own pace. Okay. So then you got a bunch of Iranians who came to America who got thrown into this individualistic, freedom based, let's share, and safety isn't in secrets anymore, but safety is in sharing kind of perspective. And so I think they held on to the traditional views more than Iranians in Iran, even under that, rigid um, government, because it was still a 40-year slow process for them. We're seeing people who are a lot less conservative coming out of Iran because they're not sticking to the idea that the traditions mean being Iranian, whereas the immigrants out here are sticking to the idea that the traditions mean being Iranian, and since I don't want to lose my Iranian culture, I got to stick closely to them. I'm missing the part where, no, actually, technology is advancing and the whole world is growing out of certain perceptions and into other perceptions.
Well, it's fascinating that what you described happens in all cultures, right?
Absolutely.
Immigrants come and they double down on their traditions and their rituals. And you've really explained why we have Iranians that are kind of doubling down on these antiquated ways, and there's a lot of judgment for it, especially from their children and grandchildren, but they're trying to hold on to something that they fear might be gone for good.
Absolutely. And I watched this happen. You know, I compare myself, who came out here when, you know, again, uh, I was 4 or 5, and the people, my own peers, and then I compare it to like the college students that every once in a while I lecture to or work with, who are particularly the Iranian Jewish ones. And I'm a little bit taken back by, wow, why are they so much more conservative than me when I'm older? And I think it's because of that. It's because as we get further with this idea of loss of cultural identity, the more we want to kind of grasp it, except what we're grasping to as the roots of our cultural identity aren't necessarily helping us. They're not necessarily even those roots. They're only roots of a world that we knew 40 years ago. And that world has expanded and shifted and changed.
That's
And
so fascinating, because what you're saying is these young people that are turning towards conservatism and grasping at these traditions that maybe don't work at all anymore. So, talk to me about what you see Iranians, some of the people that come into your practice, what you see as sort of the secrets that many of them struggle with.
so anything out of what the hierarchy declares as good. So the hierarchy declares health as good and prosperous and safe, right? It's normal. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, health seems like an important thing.
Yeah, but once you start to look at it as the only way, and once you start to look at it as a black and white, then anything unhealthy suddenly becomes shameful, right?
Hmm.
Because one way to keep people in a fear-based environment is to create things like judgment and criticism and shame, right? That first we place onto other people until they place it onto themselves to a point where we don't even need to do it for them. It becomes so internalized, the shame. So I look at people who have children with Down syndrome. I look at people who are suffering with cancer. I look at people who have different, genetic issues, health issues, who are keeping it a secret.
Right, there's shame in even having cancer, something that you have no control over, you have no ability to decide whether you get it or not, and there's shame about that.
Yeah, because again, it goes out to what does the external world view you? And it's a strength based. You want to only show the external world your strength. Why? Because you feel safer that way, right?
Right, so it's really about safety. It's not about what many people perceive as, I want to be the most perfect. It's really about, I want to be the most safe.
Absolutely. Because when you live in a foundation of fear, first and foremost, it's feelings of insecurity and safety that you tackle with, right?
Mm.
So all of it comes back to safety, even the carrying of the fancy purses and shoes with the names on it is about safety, is about showing the external world that I possess some kind of power and I possess some kind of uh, you know something that makes me feel safe. And so now I'm going to carry it on my arm to show all of you that. And really, at the end of the day, what else is it but safety? You know? So, yeah, so it's about not showing the world what you perceive or the world that you think perceives as your weaknesses. And so health limitations are weaknesses. I mean, if you take it back to our ancestral traumas, anytime in a tribe, if they had sickness, they would be vulnerable to attacks from other tribes, right? So it's a very ancestral thing we're living out, except for the fact that we don't need to anymore because we're
Yes,
not
but
going to.
yet we're in this moment when the world is technically unsafe. So I wonder how much the Iranian community is doubling down on feeling the need to, you know, surround themselves with things that make them safe. And if this moment is causing them to have more secrecy or
Well, I
less.
don't think you need to look at the Iranian community for that, right? I mean, look at the world and how divided it is 50-50 deciding that more conservative notions is our way to safety, and others saying no, more liberal notions are our way to safety. So I think everybody is trying to achieve safety, right? And unfortunately, they're going at it based on their own ancestral traumas, and so they're being triggered more into this space. And where the ultimate message should be actually their safety only in connection is where we get safety, and the rest of it is just stories. What the world is hearing is, no, let's stick to our stories more,
Right.
and
Let's really dive into our stories. Let's go to those old structures
old.
of safety, old. And it's interesting to perceive someone that's wearing all these labeled handbags and shoes and decked in head to toe, not as a statement of I'm trying to show you how much wealth I have, but I'm trying to show myself that I'm safe in the world.
Which
Right?
is
It's a
one
very
goes with the other, right?
correct,
How
which
much
is such
wealth
a
I have.
different way of understanding the Iranian culture, right? That it's really about, God, I feel really scared, which I think all of us can relate to. And how do we make ourselves feel safe in a very scary world? So I hear as a woman,
When you look at the lady or the gentleman who wants to get divorced, you have to go back to that whole thing of safety. I mean, it's the divorce is about creating brokenness, or is viewed as breaking the family unit. And there's insecurity in breaking the family unit. So don't talk about it, stay in it. Don't. And so I think it's
and there's an irony to that, Mastaneh, because if you're in a violent relationship or an abusive relationship, like even more so, you should be safer outside, and that women will stay in it for the perception that they're safer.
yes, because it's about the family unit, and your breakup makes the whole unit and then the whole community feel unsafe. It's
There's
not
something really beautiful about the allegiance within the Iranian community that the individuals have to one another. I mean, you see it on Friday night at Shabbat dinner. Like that's a non-negotiable Friday night event that every Persian family or every Iranian family observes. Not every single one, but because there's a sense of real obligation to one another.
yes, yes,
So
absolutely.
when you hear a woman that wants to divorce, how do you counsel her?
Well, I think it starts anytime you're dealing with getting people okay with themselves, and with uh, stopping the compartmentalization and bringing together, and essentially connecting to themselves, unifying themselves, because it's in that unification that ultimately they feel the most power, right? So the counseling becomes about feeling your power internally, and not needing for the external world to mirror it to you, because then it becomes one of the same. So how do we counsel them? We let them know their strengths. We get them to learn about themselves. We try to create a feeling of safety that comes from the inside out. And a lot of it starts with just getting to know yourself, you
Hmm.
know, rather than what am I carrying for everybody else?
Right,
What
which I think especially for women is very hard, right? It's easy to keep the focus on everyone else and not yourself. And especially the patriarchal vision of how women were is our job is to take care of everybody else.
that's what we're seen as doing, yourself last, because a good woman within the framework of that tribal patriarchal society is one who takes on everybody's pain and shows none of her own.
Which
So
is so heartbreaking because it really annihilates the essence of a human being, right? If you're so focused on everybody else, there is no you. And I think one of the things you're saying is it's not about disrupting or breaking the tribal culture, because there's a lot of beautiful in it, but it's also not about abandoning yourself. And I think
I don't see it as a either or. I don't see it as we have to break the tribal to get into the individualistic, because even if we want to label the individualistic, certainly we've all felt the lack in that as well. I think it's about a collective evolution, right? To grow out of fear-based foundational situations, no matter where you're at, because that's where the power lies. That's where the ease lies. But even in that, there's a lot of feedback, because I literally have clients, Rabbi Hirsch, and I'm sure you can speak to this, that fear coming out of fear, because they think it's the fear that motivates them.
Yes, they think it's the fear that, I'm not going to come out because that's another, then I'll create more fear upon more fear for myself.
That's right. So as long as we view fear as a motivating factor uh, to growth, then we have no, why would we come out of it? So as long as the thought is that, listen, there's a known true way for you to be. You grow up, you get married, you stay with your husband, you have children, you get an education, you make money, and this is proven that you're going to be happy, right? And so the fear makes you do all of this, and you find yourself at the other end of it not feeling satisfied and happy, because you had to essentially push away a lot of what you needed to experience in order to follow this known and true route, right? But then you kind of get at that place and you look at it and you go, but look at the success I had following the fear route. What's to say if I put the fear away that I'm going to be safe? And so then there's a lot of questioning of that. So where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in a constant perpetual loop a lot of times.
Oh my God, this
Either
is
keep
so important. Mastaneh, before I even keep asking you questions, I know we have a lot of questions from our audience, and I want to make sure people feel comfortable to put them in the Q&A anonymously. Feel free to ask all kinds of questions, because we are here to talk about how to understand the stigmas in the Iranian culture, how the origins of them were very important, but also how the evolution of them needs to change, and so that people can be authentically themselves. And I think what you just said, so please feel free to add your questions. I think what you just said is, I think in every culture, people feel like if I follow the rules, I'm going to get the pot of gold at the end and the rainbow. And when they don't, because there is no pot of gold or rainbow guarantee, then you start to really question, but I did everything right. I followed the rules. Why is it not working for me? And I think what you were saying is, we need to have more examples of people not following the rules, not because they're just trying to disrupt, but because they actually want to be authentic and be themselves. So what does it look like as a modern Iranian to embrace your authenticity?
I think it starts with knowing that you're okay, you know, really putting aside these concepts of shame. Stop judging yourself, stop criticizing yourself, and once you
Very easily said than done, Mastaneh, but
very easily,
very hard. I mean, I, as a rabbi, I have my whole bucket of issues, and shame is definitely in there. How did you go about saying, you know, if you're gay, for example, in the Iranian culture or in the Ashkenazi culture, in any culture, how do you set aside that sense of I'm not safe and set aside that shame, so in order to be authentic? What tools
so
do you suggest?
again, you have to go back to the growth of the individual is very dependent of the growth of the society, right? They have to parallel each other, because right now in Iran, being gay isn't safe. It's just not.
Right.
The government has very strict rules about it. So how would I convey that message to someone who lives in that society? Very differently than a
Right.
person that I would convey it in this society, in California, in Los Angeles, California. I got to take it down to even Los Angeles, California in the year 2020. But as society makes it more safe, right, then we're able to look at our internal conflicts and really look at, is it my sexual orientation that's so terrible? Or is it all of this other stuff that was placed upon the idea of me being same sex as opposed to heterosexual? So the idea of reproduction, it's a main thing when I talk to families, and I do a lot. about what their issue is with their child being LGBTQ, well, they'll never be able to have children. And I get it. This is a huge issue because for them, having children in a large family is equal to being safe, right?
Right.
So it's a huge issue, the thought that their child will not have children. So then we bring it back to, well, let's look at our society today. Let's look at the fact that there's a lot of ways for people to have children nowadays, and that it's not reliant on a male female getting together and having children. So one by one, you start to take away those things that are ancestrally have the power or the trigger points that still carry that fear in them. And you do it through compassion, you do it through rationalization, do it through um, introduction of the community that now allows for these people to actually live safe, these people being LGBTQ or women or Jews or whoever, right?
Right. And I want to be very clear, Mastaneh, that this is not a Iranian issue. This is in every culture to
This
make people go from,
different degrees, but in every culture.
yes, there's fear-based culture and there's faith-based culture. And the more that we're fear-based, the more we drive down on those negative behaviors or those old traditions that may not be serving us.
Yeah.
There's a number of questions coming out about how women struggle in particular in Iranian community. Do you have certain books or stories that are films that describe the women's struggle in the Iranian community that you recommend?
I'm sure there's a lot, but as soon as you ask that question, of
Of
course, I'll
course.
link, but I'm happy to send a list that we could share. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of like wonderful, actually Iranian female authors right now writing great books and doing great things. Um,
Sheila Nahai?
yes, yes,
Gina Nahai, not Sheila Nahai. Gina.
Gina Nahai. Yeah, there's a lot of them. I terrible with names, and so pardon me for not but I'm sure people could Google it and see. But I think, listen, women's roles have always been, um, again, like I said, that of essentially the keeper of the secret, right? To the point where it's almost been like our duty to, and it's the idea of that's where their strength was defined. The strength of the woman in this society was how well can she keep the secrets and thus protect her family. And so you see so much shame and guilt and uh, self internal judgment and self internal criticism from females onto themselves because they see it as their role to keep the family safe by keeping the secrets, by only allowing the
Right, which goes directly to my next questions, which is what do you say to the woman who wants to be successful in business, wants to be an entrepreneur, and wants to succeed, but her husband is resisting because her job, that's not her job. That's not what they signed up for. How does she speak to her husband? How does she speak to finding the balance between being that caretaker and wanting to be a traditional wife, but also wanting to be out in the world and powerful in that respect as well?
um I think you speak to it by creating safety and the idea that it doesn't have to be either or, and it doesn't have to be both, because I think right now it's about a very deeply embedded lack situation. So you're not good enough if you're just a housewife or just a mother, and you're not good enough if you're just an entrepreneur or just a businesswoman. And so this idea has now evolved of like the superwoman that I think
Correct.
everybody deals with, right? And it's almost like a challenge that the patriarchy throws out, like, well, you still need to do this, but if you want to do that, show me how well you do this, and then you can do that too. And so now it's like, oh my gosh, now I got to be great at all of it, right?
Right, which makes you feel even more unsafe because the standard of what you have to achieve is so high and almost impossible.
Yeah.
We have so
So
many
that
questions coming
comes
in.
back to the idea of know yourself, know what's important to you, listen to yourself intuitively, and really follow that. And that's always evolving and changing. And
And
so
what do you do when it affects other people? Like we have a number of questions around, my child comes out and wants to tell the entire extended family and bring shame to me. What do you say to, you know, the family that they're okay with it in their little private room, but maybe not with their whole family and every single person knowing?
the moment, if we look at the LGBTQ perspective specifically, the moment that a gay person decides to come out of the closet and live their truth, they've already made a decision to walk away from a collectivist perspective. Because within a collectivist perspective, within collectivist culture, you would not come out as gay. You just wouldn't. That makes your society, your in group too unsafe. It's too different. Okay. So the moment the choice is made to come out, you've walked into an individualistic mindset, right? Or you've
So would you
evolved
say
out.
that that
You've
person's
evolved.
already abandoning their family?
They're not abandoning, they're evolving out of it,
Wow.
right?
Which is
You
heartbreaking.
you can't look at it as one or the other. You got to look at it as an evolution. And the
Right.
evolution there is, I cannot continue to live a compartmentalized life where I do half my life the way the society wants it and half my life the way I want it. And therefore, I'm unconnected. And therefore, I don't feel satisfied. I don't feel right. I don't feel true. And I'm not doing much good for future lineages because I feel half a person all the time.
This is breaking my heart because I feel like there's so, as we're getting these questions in, we're
So
getting inundated with questions. So I apologize if I'm not
follow,
answering all
just
of that.
follow that up and see it through. The moment that the child, the gay child, comes out to the parent, the invitation becomes evolve with me, evolve out of the collectivist with me. And so now it's up to that parent to get the courage and evolve out of it, or don't, or at least be true enough to yourself to say, I can't do it. I can't take that leap right now. And I had parents that it takes them a while, it takes them 3, 4, 5, 10 years to do it. And it's not overnight. And you don't do away with these ancestral perceptions overnight, but you should be working on them.
Which is so beautiful because to see difference in the community, individualism, I would say, as an invitation for you to evolve, right? So we have a question here that, I want to leave my husband. I'm not happy. And yet I'm fearful of being financially strapped and still presenting to my community that I am wealthy and powerful and safe. And so I think there's something for you to say about that.
Again, it's the idea of, are you at a place where you can at least work towards evolving out of the perspective that you need to live by the rules of a certain hierarchical power that's been dictating rules to you? And as long as you want to live by those rules, then at least accept the fact that you're still living within a collectivist, which is okay. You can't even you shouldn't hate yourself for that even. It's just an acceptance of, okay, here I am. And if it doesn't feel good, then I got to take the next step.
Right. And you can have these feelings of wanting to live by the rules on the one hand and also not wanting to live by them. Like I think what you're
The
saying
rules
is
keep us safe, don't they? The rules keep us safe. They
right.
give.
That's all of Judaism. The rules keep us safe, but there's freedom within them. And here you're saying we all live with this tension of I want to be individualistic and happy and fulfilled. And I also want to feel secure and safe. And those seem in the Iranian culture to be appearingly in conflict with one another. But you're telling us they're not. They're an invitation to grow as a culture. So I see a lot of JQ International, Keshet, women's organizations really trying to serve as an invitation to the community. How are people responding to those invitations?
A lot better now than 20 years ago.
Mhm.
You know, I think that there is, the messages are getting through, you know, the importance of feeling safe internally rather than waiting for the outside world to make you safe is coming through. The realization that who you are internally thus creates your outside world. So each of one of us have that power to do it. Every time a mother of a gay son says to me, I'm okay with it, but I can't let my friends know, then it's like, well, then what are you doing to make the shift in the collective? What are you doing? Because if you're okay with it, then chances are other people are okay with it too. But if we don't all sit and share the fact that we're all okay with it, we're just afraid of each other, then how can we break down those fears? And that goes for domestic violence, that goes for divorce, that goes for illness. I mean, I have to tell you the number of people right now who report to me that even with something that's as out there as COVID, right? And yet people are keeping it a secret. Why would you
It's so,
keep it a secret?
no, I hear that all the time about COVID, but what I say, wow, is, it takes a lot of courage. What you're talking about is to live an authentic life, to be who you are on the outside, consistent with who you are on the inside takes courage. And in every collective culture, to do that, you have to stand up and say, because what's interesting for me as a rabbi, especially to a large, when I was serving a large Iranian community, nobody was talking to each other, but they were all talking to me.
Yeah.
And they're like, no one would accept me. And I'm thinking to myself, actually, they all accepted. If you only knew what was going on in their home, right? There's a lot more compassion and love than we give each other credit for.
Absolutely. And I mean, if anyone was to take away anything from our discussion here, I would be most happy if they take away the idea that true safety actually comes in connection. And how do you connect? By letting down your guard, by being vulnerable, by sharing the fears. That's how you connect, and that's how you feel safe, not by further dividing each other, not by keeping bigger secrets.
I
not
cannot think of a more beautiful point to end on. The true connection, true safety comes from sharing your vulnerabilities. I cannot thank you enough, Mastaneh. I hope this is one of many conversations that we have in the future, because the volume of questions that came in and the need to talk and expose this taboo conversations and to really understand the origins of it. It comes from a place of feeling unsafe, and we all feel that. So how do we really feel safe? We get connected to one another. I want to thank you, Mastaneh, and I want to tell everybody that you coming here and sharing your truth, whether anonymously, as a viewer, or participating in the Biachad programming, is a way that we will break down these stigmas and taboos. Mastaneh, thank you, and to all of you, be well and stay well. I look forward to seeing you soon on Biachad.